one thing that you do not do on your podcast, which I really appreciate, you do not sugarcoat electoralism at all. You do not sugarcoat what Joe Biden is. But I wanted to ask you, what are some of the things we can push for realistically with this incoming administration that's, coming in whether we like it or not?
Okay, let me be honest with you. I know personally some of the people that Biden has collected around him, and I know about the careers of others. Here's what I mean. The new Secretary of the Treasury, Janet Yellen, was a classmate of mine at Yale University. We got our PhDs in economics at the same time. We took the same classes. We had the same professors. I know what her education was because it's the same as my own. And I have followed her career ever since. I know Jared Bernstein. I know Heather Boucher. I know some of the people that he's gathered around him. Nice people, good people, honest people. I have no quarrel with them as human beings at all. But there's nothing in their careers that has ever made them, at least not in public or in private that I know of, question the capitalist system. They're not willing to ask the question, could the problems we have and our failure to find solutions be something systemic so that we really have to change the system to solve them? Let me give you an example. The inequality that we have in the United States today, you know what it's like? It's like the inequality we had at the end of the last century and the end of the century before that. Inequality is not a new problem. It is an old problem that capitalism has failed to solve. We've had anti-poverty programs from here to tomorrow. Lyndon Johnson had famous anti-poverty programs. Kennedy did. Even Eisenhower did. They all promised that they would do something about inequality. And yet it is worse now than it was 50 years ago. It's worse now than it was 100 years ago. And that's not because people are bad or stupid or anything else. It's a systemic problem that people don't want to see as a systemic problem. So they fritter around the edges. They change a law. They do this. They improve education. Things that are nice in themselves, but they're not adequate to the depth of the problem. And that's my fear. So let me give you a concrete answer. One of the first things I would do is borrow something that worked in the 1930s that Franklin Roosevelt did. He said, he gave a speech, and here's what he said. If the private sector of our economy is either unable or unwilling to provide jobs for the millions of Americans who do not want charity, who do not want a handout, they just want a job. They want to contribute, and they want to be paid properly for their contribution. If the private sector can't do that, then there's no option but for the government to do it. And I'm going to do it, he said. And he did. Between 1934 and 1941, he hired somewhere between 10 and 15, there are debates about it, 10 and 15 million civilian people to do civilian work. I'm not talking about the military, which toward the end was important. The civilian, he did that. He hired them. He gave them a job. He gave them the self-esteem and respect that goes with a job. He paid them a decent salary so they could keep their homes and take care of their families. You want to know what we ought to have done 10 months ago? We should have done that. Trump should have done that. He didn't do it. If Mr. Biden comes in and he doesn't do it either, then what he is doing is telling the American people, yeah, you got rid of Trump, but what you got in its place when it comes to the real basic things you need isn't all that much better. Yeah, Biden will give you a $2,000 check, whereas the Republicans only wanted to give you $600. Sure, $2,000 is more and better than $600. But if you know, as I do, that the average amount of unpaid rent by people who are behind in their rent is currently over $5,000, you will understand that giving them 2 is not the solution. It's like throwing a quarter into the hand of a beggar on the street. Is it better than nothing? You bet. Does it solve his problem? Not even close. And you have to face that. And my fear is they're not going to do that. They're not going to face, for example, the problem that we have hundreds of thousands of homeless people in the United States right now. And we have hundreds of thousands of homes and apartments sitting empty. There is no excuse for those 2 things to sit side by side. That's the capitalist system that makes it this irrationality necessary, because the landlord has to have rent and those poor people don't have the money to pay the rent. So the homeless people sit across the street staring at the empty apartments. But that's a systemic problem. A system that can't give everybody food, clothing, and shelter has just proven itself to be an unjustified burden on the human race.
So, yeah, and a statistic that you point out on your show that I think is so staggering that this piggybacks on everything you just said. And yeah, I heard this first on your show. Since the pandemic, there are 1 million less people providing public services. During a pandemic where it's needed the most, there's 1 million less. Like, it's calling it backwards is an understatement. There's not a word for how ridiculous that is.
Well, you know, and look at the way our system is set up. If you have masses of people unemployed for whatever reason, those people, because they're not earning a job, the company is not doing well because that's why they got fired in the first place. So those people don't pay taxes the way they used to. The businesses don't pay taxes. So the money coming in to fund public services is exhausted. So people are unemployed. They need more help from the government, not less. But you've set up a system where the government is able to give less services as the people. This is an organization that is so dysfunctional that the amazing thing, which I expect historians in the future, looking back on this period, they're going to scratch their heads and say, how could those people have allowed such a dysfunctional system to last as long as it did?
Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. You can tweet me an article at Ron Placone. We'll go through it together and make it our own. Get your